Hi, this is International Master David Pruess for Chess.com, and this is going to be the first of two lectures about king and pawn versus king endgames. Now, a king and pawn versus king endgame is only going to be a win if the person with the extra pawn is able to turn that pawn into a queen or a rook. In other words, if they're able to get it down to the end of the board and promote it to another piece. If not, you are not able to checkmate with a single pawn, so don't even bother trying. So today we're going to look at three sort of fundamental questions to ask yourself when you get to an endgame with a king and a single pawn against a king. The first question that you need to ask yourself is actually just whether your pawn can walk all the way down the board one step at a time and become a queen without the opponent's king interfering. So in this position here, if it were white's move, they should in fact just push b6, and the black king can't quite get there in time to stop the pawn, and so you queen without any assistance from your king. But let's say that the black king were on this square here, then you would count that 1, 2, 2, 3, 3. You're not going to be able to queen your pawn. So you just have to answer that question right away at the beginning before you start trying to maneuver with your king. You just want to know whether or not you're going to be able to just walk the pawn down and queen it. Okay? Now, here is the fundamental position to understand for king and pawn endings. White's pawn is one step away from queening and blocked by the black king. So the question is the black king going to get out of the way of the pawn and let it queen, or is it going to be able to block the pawn? Well, this basically depends on whose move it is. And that is a crucial thing in endgames, that you have a concept called Zugzwang, which is that you have to move and make your position worse. So let's say it's white's move here. Okay, white would be forced. They can't move the pawn because the black king's blocking it. So white would be forced to move his king over here to c6 in order to keep defending the pawn. But in so doing, white creates a stalemate. There's no possible move for the black king here, and that's a draw. Stalemate, draw. Now, let's go back here and imagine that it is black's move. If it's black's move, black only has one legal move with their king. White's controlling these squares here. So the black king is actually forced to step out of the way of the pawn. The white king can advance, and next move, black can't stop white from moving the pawn forward and queening. So look at this position again for a moment and understand, if white has to move here, he has to move his king and make a stalemate. If he walks away, black will just take the pawn, right? So if it's white's move, it's a draw. And if it's black's move, white can actually win because the black king has to step out of the way and white makes progress. And that is Zugzwang. Okay, and this is a crucial position to remember. And if you're in any position where the pawn is a couple steps further back, what you're asking yourself is, once my pawn gets down to the 7th rank, is it going to be my turn or my opponent's turn, right? Who's going to have to move their king and let the other person get what they want? All right, so I've got one more position for you today to talk about. Now again, this is a position where it matters whose move it is. But the concept I want to introduce to you here is that when the kings are staring at each other like this, this is called opposition. Okay, when there's one space in between them and they're staring at each other like this is called opposition. And if your opponent has to move, then we say you have the opposition, because it's actually good for you for it to be your opponent's move. You want him to step aside. If you have to move, then we say your opponent has the opposition. So look, imagine black has to move first. Their king can't continue to control all three squares that the white king could advance to. So the king has to, say, step aside, and then the white king is able to flank the black king and get closer to controlling this square here and gain control of this square. So now the black king will move back to block the white king. And now white can take the opposition again. The black king has to step aside again, and now the white king moves here. Or I could do it differently for you this time. The black king could move this way, and the white king could move here. And now you see the white king has gained control of all the squares he needs to escort this pawn down the board and get a queen. Now, imagine instead that it is white's move first in this position. If it's white's move first, he has to move his king, and then black can follow him. And now black is keeping the opposition. If the white king moves, the black king can block him. Wherever he goes, the black king steps in the way. And you see the black king keeps the white king from walking around him and controlling the squares in front of the pawn. So eventually, if black's able to block the white king forever, white is going to have to make a pawn move. And that would bring us to the second video on king and pawn versus king, where we'll talk about it. But first, let me just say that in general for this position here, if black has to step aside, white's going to win by flanking him. And if white has to step aside and has to move his pawn forward in front of his king, it's actually going to end up as a draw. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you around on Chess.com.